Caleb Morgan dropped to his knees in the blood-stained snow and pulled the frozen child against his chest. She weighed nothing, just bones and terror wrapped in a dead woman's shawl. "I got you," he whispered, his voice cracking for the first time in 6 years. "I got you now." The girl didn't cry, didn't speak, just stared at him with eyes that had seen too much death for someone so small. Behind them, 2 bodies lay frozen beside the overturned wagon. Her parents. And somewhere in that endless white wilderness, the men who killed them were still hunting. If you want to see how one broken man and one orphaned child save each other, subscribe to my channel and watch until the end. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. The wind cut through Caleb Morgan like a blade made of ice. He'd been tracking wolves for 3 days now. 2 calves dead, a third one missing. A man living alone couldn't afford losses like that, not in Montana Territory, not in the winter of 1882. His horse, a gray mare named Dusty, snorted and stamped beneath him. "Easy, girl." Caleb patted her neck. "Just a little further." The storm had come out of nowhere. 1 minute clear skies. The next a wall of white so thick he could barely see his own hands on the reins. But he'd spotted wolf tracks heading west, and Caleb Morgan wasn't a man who gave up easy. That stubbornness had cost him plenty over the years. His wife, his daughter, his badge, his faith in just about everything. Now it was just him and the prairie, and the silence that stretched for miles in every direction. Some days, that silence felt like freedom. Most days, it felt like a grave he was digging one shovel at a time. The wolf appeared without warning. A big gray shape slinking between snowdrifts maybe 50 yards ahead. Old, scarred. The alpha male Caleb had been hunting for weeks. He raised his rifle, took aim. The shot cracked through the frozen air. Missed. Damn! Caleb spurred Dusty forward, following the tracks as they cut west across the open terrain. For nearly a mile he tracked that wolf. The storm got worse with every passing minute. Visibility dropped to nothing. 20 feet. Then 10. Then barely the length of his arm. He was about to turn back when Dusty stopped dead. Her ears flattened. Her whole body went rigid. "What is it, girl?" Caleb squinted into the white. A dark shape emerged from the curtain of snow. Not the wolf. Something bigger. Something that didn't belong out here in the middle of nowhere. A wagon. Overturned. Half buried in drifts. Canvas cover torn and flapping in the wind like a wounded bird trying to fly. Caleb dismounted slow. Rifle ready. Every instinct screaming that something was wrong here. Something was very wrong. He circled the wreckage. Found them on the other side. 2 bodies. A man and a woman. Frozen solid in the positions death had granted them. The man's arm stretched out like he'd been reaching for something or someone in his final moments. Caleb removed his hat despite the cold. Old habit. Respect for the dead, even strangers. "Lord have mercy," he murmured. Then he heard it. A sound so small it almost got lost in the howling wind. A whimper. Caleb's head snapped toward the wagon bed. Part of the canvas still clung to the frame, creating a pocket of shelter against the worst of the storm. He moved fast, shoved the frozen fabric aside. And his heart stopped. A child. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, huddled beneath a wool blanket that couldn't possibly be keeping her warm enough. Her face was pale as the snow around her. Lips blue. Eyes, God, those eyes. They stared up at him without blinking. Empty. Hollow. Like someone had reached inside this child and scooped out everything that made her human. In her small hands, she clutched a raggedy stuffed rabbit like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to this world. "Lord above," Caleb breathed. The girl should have been dead. Hours in this cold, maybe longer, no child should have survived it. But here she was, alive, watching him with eyes that had already seen too much. Caleb knelt in the snow. Slow. Careful. The way you'd approach a wounded animal. "Hey there." he said soft. Hey, can you hear me? Nothing. Not a word. Not a nod. Just those empty eyes fixed on his face. My name's Caleb. I ain't gonna hurt you. He kept his voice low and steady, even though his heart was pounding hard enough to crack ribs. I'm gonna get you somewhere warm, okay? But I need you to let me pick you up. Can you do that? The girl didn't respond, didn't move, just kept staring. Behind them, a wolf howled, then another. The pack was close, drawn by the scent of death. Caleb made his decision. He wrapped the girl in his heavy coat and lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, just bones and frozen fabric, and that damned rabbit clutched against her chest. She didn't fight him, didn't cry, didn't make a single sound. That silence scared him more than tears ever could have. I got you, Caleb said as he settled her in front of him on Dusty's back. I got you now. He pulled her close against his chest and kicked the mare into motion. As they rode away, Caleb glanced back. Shadows moved across the snow wolves approaching the wagon and its lifeless guardians. But the girl was safe now. He'd make sure of it. Whatever it took. The ride to the cabin became a race against the storm and the night and the cold trying to steal this child's life. Caleb held her tight, shielding her from the wind with his body. She shivered so hard, it shook them both. Her small hands gripped his shirt, the first voluntary movement she'd made since he found her. Stay with me, Caleb said through clenched teeth. You hear me, stay awake. Her eyes fluttered, started to close. No. His voice came out sharper than he intended. No, you don't get to quit. Not now. Not after everything you've survived. Her eyes opened, unfocused but responsive. Good. That was good. That was something. Memories crashed over him like waves trying to drag him under. Another cold night. Another desperate fight against death. Margaret burning with fever. Little Lily whimpering in the next room with the same sickness. The doctor riding through the storm, but arriving too late. 2 graves dug in frozen ground. 2 pieces of his soul buried forever. Not again. Caleb growled into the wind. Not this time. He pushed Dusty harder. The horse struggled through deepening snow, exhausted but willing. Good girl. Faithful girl. She'd never let him down. When the cabin finally emerged from the white, Caleb nearly wept with relief. He kicked the door open, carried the girl inside, laid her on his bed. She was still shivering, but weaker now. Her skin felt like ice beneath his calloused fingers. Come on! Come on! He worked fast. Fire first kindling flint spark. Flames caught reluctantly, then grew. Blankets next piled on her small form. Then water set to boil. The cabin was cold as a tomb, but it was shelter. It was hope. Caleb knelt beside the bed and took the girl's frozen hands between his palms, rubbed them gently, willing warmth back into her fingers. You're gonna be okay, he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. You're safe now. Nobody's gonna hurt you. She watched him work, never spoke, never cried. Just those haunted eyes following his every move. On the wall behind her hung a faded shawl. Margaret's shawl. Caleb hadn't been able to move it in 6 years. In the corner sat a small cradle covered with a sheet. Lily's cradle. He'd kept them. All of it. Couldn't let go. Couldn't move on. I couldn't save them, he whispered more to himself than to the child. But maybe I can save you. When the broth was hot, he brought it to her with a spoon. You need to drink this. Warm you from inside. The girl turned her face away. Please, Caleb said. Just a little. She looked at him then. Really looked. And something in her eyes shifted from empty to afraid. When he lifted the spoon toward her, she flinched. Caleb froze. He knew that reaction. Had seen it before in his years as a lawman. That wasn't the flinch of a child startled by a stranger. That was the learned response of someone who expected pain to follow kindness. Something dark and cold settled in his chest. "Hey." He lowered the spoon, set it aside. "I ain't gonna hurt you. I promise. I ain't like whoever did that to you." Her eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, expecting the betrayal. "I know you got no reason to trust me," Caleb continued. "I'm just some stranger who pulled you out of a snowbank. But I'm asking you to try. Just a little. 'Cause I swear on my wife's grave and my daughter's memory, I will never raise a hand to you. Never." Something flickered in those empty eyes. Not trust, not yet. But maybe the first tiny seed of it. The girl reached out with trembling hands and cupped water from his palms, drank like a wounded animal, watching him the whole time. It was enough for now. Hours passed. The fire grew. The cabin warmed. Caleb sat in the chair beside the bed, watching the rise and fall of the girl's chest beneath the blankets. She'd fallen asleep eventually, exhaustion winning out over fear. In sleep, she looked younger, smaller, more fragile than any child should ever look. He studied her face in the firelight, noticed things he'd missed before. A small scar near her hairline, faded bruises on her wrists barely visible but definitely there. Old ones, not from the wagon accident. What had this child endured before fate threw her into his path? Caleb's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to find whoever had hurt her, wanted to make them pay. But that rage wouldn't help her now. What she needed was safety. Warmth. Someone who wouldn't leave. He could give her that much. Maybe. As the night deepened, Caleb searched through the few items he'd grabbed from the wagon before the wolves moved in. The girl's coat. A small bag with a change of clothes. A book of nursery rhymes. A locket with 2 tiny portraits inside a man and woman who must have been her parents. And in the coat pocket, folded small and hidden deep, a note. Caleb smoothed the paper by firelight and read, "If anything happens to us, find Judge Silas Crawford in Red Fork. He will know what to do. Thomas." No surname, no explanation, just a name and a desperate hope scratched in shaky handwriting. Caleb tucked the paper into his own pocket and looked at the sleeping child. "What kind of trouble were your folks running from?" he murmured. She didn't answer, just clutched her rabbit tighter in her sleep. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, the fire crackled. And Caleb Morgan sat vigil through the longest night he'd known since burying his family. He didn't sleep, didn't dare. Just watched her breathe and made promises to himself and to her that he intended to keep. Morning came gray and cold. Caleb woke with his neck stiff, his body aching from the uncomfortable chair. The fire had burned low, but the cabin held enough warmth. The girl was sitting up in bed, watching him. When their eyes met, she looked away fast, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. "Hey there." Caleb sat forward slowly. "How you feeling?" "Nothing. Not a word." "Bet you're hungry. I ain't much of a cook, but I can manage oatmeal. Maybe some honey if I got any left." He moved to the stove, keeping his movements slow and predictable. No sudden gestures, nothing that might spook her. As he cooked, he talked, kept his voice low and easy. "My name's Caleb Morgan. Most folks call me Caleb. Used to be a deputy sheriff over in Colorado Territory, but that was a long time ago. Now I just live out here. Raise some cattle. Keep to myself mostly." He set a bowl of oatmeal beside her on the bed. Poured a cup of milk from the cold jug. "I found a note in your coat," he continued, settling back into his chair. "Mentioned a Judge Crawford in Red Fork. That mean anything to you?" For a long moment the girl just stared at the oatmeal. Then so quiet he almost missed it. "Papa wrote it." Caleb's heart kicked. Her first real words. "Your papa," he repeated gently. "The man by the wagon." She nodded. Once. Small. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Another long pause. Then, Grace. Grace. He let the name settle between them. "That's a real pretty name." She didn't respond to the compliment, just picked up the spoon and started eating. Slow, mechanical. The way someone eats when they've learned to make food last. "There's plenty more if you're still hungry," Caleb said. Grace glanced up, surprised, like she wasn't used to the offer. That dark, cold feeling settled in his chest again. "Eat as much as you want," he added. "Ain't nobody here gonna stop you." She ate more after that. Not much, but more. When she finished, Caleb leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, tried to look as non-threatening as a man his size could manage. "Grace, I need to ask you something important. Those folks by the wagon, your mama and papa, what happened to them? Can you tell me?" Grace's hands tightened on her rabbit. "The bad men," she whispered. "They found us. Bad men. They've been following us since St. Louis." Her voice was barely audible. "Papa said they wanted to hurt us because of what he knew." What did he know? Important things. About the railroad. About people who do bad things and don't get punished. Caleb felt pieces clicking together in his mind. A journalist maybe. An investigator. Someone who'd uncovered something dangerous enough to get himself and his wife killed. "These bad men," he said carefully. "Did you see them? At the wagon?" Grace's whole body went rigid. "I hid," she said, her voice cracking for the first time. "Under the canvas, like Papa told me. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I heard them. I heard—" She stopped. Couldn't go on. Caleb wanted to pull her into his arms, wanted to promise that everything would be okay. But he'd learned the hard way that promises like that were lies dressed up in comfort. "You did good," he said instead. "You survived. That's all that matters." "But Mama and Papa? They wanted you to live. That's why they hid you. That's why your papa wrote that note." Caleb's voice went rough. "And I'm gonna make sure you stay alive. You understand me, whatever it takes." Grace looked at him, really looked. Those haunted eyes searching for something she desperately needed to find. "Promise?" The word came out small and broken. Caleb met her gaze, held it. "I promise." She nodded slowly. Not trust, not yet, but something close to hope, something she'd been afraid to feel. "Now," Caleb said, standing. "We got some work to do. Your folks deserve proper burying, and then we need to figure out how to get you to Red Fork and this Judge Crawford." Grace's face paled. "The bad men might be there." "Maybe, but hiding out here forever ain't an option either. Whatever your papa knew, whatever he was carrying, somebody needs to finish what he started." "Why?" Grace asked. "Why do you care?" The question hit harder than she probably intended. Why did he care? He'd spent 6 years not caring about anything or anyone. 6 years hiding from the world and from himself. 6 years waiting to die, so he could finally be with Margaret and Lily again. And then this child appeared out of a snowstorm, half frozen and haunted, and something inside him, something he'd thought was dead and buried, came back to life. "Because someone needs to," Caleb said finally. "And right now, that someone is me." Grace considered this. Then she slid off the bed, still clutching her rabbit, and stood before him. So small, so fierce. "I can help," she said. "I'm not useless." "Never thought you were. Papa taught me things. How to be quiet. How to watch for danger. How to remember important details. Smart man, your papa." "He was." Her voice wavered. "He was the smartest man I ever knew." Caleb knelt so they were eye level. This close he could see the tears she was fighting to hold back. The grief she was too young to carry, but carrying anyway. "We're gonna make this right, Grace. I don't know how yet, but we're gonna make it right." She studied his face for a long moment. Then she did something that broke his heart and healed it at the same time. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and cold and trembling, but they held on tight. The ride back to the wagon was silent. Grace sat in front of Caleb on Dusty's back, wrapped in his coat, her eyes fixed on the endless white horizon. She hadn't spoken since they left the cabin. Hadn't cried either. That worried him more than tears would have. When the wagon came into view, that dark shape against all that white, Grace's whole body tensed. "You don't have to look," Caleb said. "I can do this alone." "No." Her voice was steady, determined. "I need to say goodbye." He helped her down and set her on a small rise overlooking the scene. The wolves had been there, evidence of their feeding was clear in the disturbed snow. But they'd left enough for a proper burial. Small mercies. Caleb worked for hours. The ground fought him like an enemy, frozen solid, unyielding. His shoulders screamed, his hands blistered even through gloves, but he didn't stop. Grace watched, never looked away, never broke. When the graves were ready, he wrapped the bodies in blankets and lowered them gently into the earth. Then he fashioned crosses from broken wagon planks and drove them into the frozen ground. Grace approached slowly, still holding her rabbit. "Thomas and Eleanor Sullivan," Caleb read from the family Bible he'd found in the wagon. "Your mama and papa." Grace stood between the two mounds, so small against the vast white emptiness. Then she did something that shattered him. She took her rabbit, the one she'd been clutching since he found her, the one thing she had left from before, and placed it gently on her mother's grave. "Grace," Caleb said softly. "You don't have to. Bun will keep her company," Grace said, "so she won't be lonely in heaven." Caleb's throat closed up. He tried to speak. Couldn't. This child who had lost everything was giving away the only thing she had left, because she couldn't stand the thought of her mother being alone. He knelt in the snow and pulled Grace into his arms. She stiffened at first. Then slowly she melted against him. Her small body shaking with sobs she'd been holding back for days, maybe weeks, maybe longer. Caleb held her while she cried. Didn't say anything. Didn't try to make it better. Just let her grieve the way she needed to. When the tears finally slowed, Grace pulled back and wiped her face with her sleeve. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't you dare apologize," Caleb said gruffly. "Don't ever apologize for loving someone enough to cry for them." She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd found her, something besides fear and emptiness showed in her eyes. Trust. Small. Fragile. Newborn. But real. "We should go," Grace said quietly, "before the bad men find us." Caleb stood, offered her his hand. "Yeah," he agreed. "We should." She took his hand, held tight, and together they walked away from the graves, leaving the dead behind, but carrying their memory forward. That night back at the cabin, Grace fell asleep early, exhausted from grief and cold, and the terrible weight of everything she'd lost. Caleb sat in his chair by the fire, reading through the items he'd recovered from the wagon. The Bible, a small journal in Eleanor Sullivan's handwriting, a photograph of the family taken in happier times, and hidden in the journal's binding another note. This one more detailed. March 12th. They're still following us. Thomas says we must reach Judge Crawford before it's too late. He's sent the evidence ahead with Dr. Samuel Blackwood's son in Wyoming. If we don't make it, the truth must still come out. Too many have died already. The railroad cannot be allowed to silence us. Caleb read it twice, 3 times. Evidence. A judge. A doctor's son in Wyoming. This was bigger than a family running from trouble. This was conspiracy. Murder. Powerful men protecting their secrets with blood. And now a 7-year-old girl was the only loose end left. Caleb looked at Grace sleeping peacefully for the first time since he'd found her. "What did I get myself into?" he murmured. But even as he asked the question, he knew the answer didn't matter. He'd made a promise. And Caleb Morgan kept his promises, even the ones that might get him killed. Grace woke once in the night crying out from a nightmare she couldn't escape. Caleb was beside her before she fully woke, his hand on her shoulder, his voice low and steady. "It's okay. You're safe. I'm here." She blinked at him in the darkness, tears streaming down her face. "I dreamed they found us," she whispered. "The bad men. They were hurting you." "Ain't nobody gonna hurt me, sweetheart. And ain't nobody gonna hurt you." "But what if—" "No what ifs." Caleb's voice was firm. "I fought in the war, spent years as a lawman. I've faced down outlaws and killers and worse. And I'm still standing." Grace sniffled. "You're not scared. Everybody's scared sometimes. Being brave don't mean you ain't afraid. It means you do what needs doing anyway." She considered this. Then, "Papa used to say something like that." "Sounds like your papa and I would have gotten along." A tiny smile flickered across her face, gone almost before it appeared, but real. "Will you stay?" she asked. "Until I fall asleep." "I'll stay as long as you need me." Grace settled back against the pillow. Her hand found his and held on. "Caleb." "Yeah." "Thank you. For burying them. For everything." His chest tightened. "You're welcome, Grace." Her eyes drifted closed. Her breathing deepened. But her hand never let go of his. And Caleb sat there through the long dark hours, watching over this child who had somehow cracked open his frozen heart and let the light back in. Outside, the wind howled. But inside, for the first time in 6 years, the cabin felt like a home again. 3 days passed before Caleb decided they couldn't wait any longer. Grace had grown stronger. She ate more, spoke more, even smiled once when he burned the biscuit so badly they could have been used as horseshoes. But every night brought nightmares. Every sudden sound made her flinch. And twice, Caleb had spotted riders on the distant ridge too far to identify, but close enough to worry him. "We're leaving tomorrow," he told her over breakfast. "Heading to Red Fork." Grace's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. "The bad men might be there." "Might be. But that judge your papa mentioned, Crawford, he's our best chance at figuring out what's going on. And maybe stopping it. What if he can't help us? Then we figure out something else." Caleb met her eyes. "But we can't hide forever, Grace. Your papa wanted you to reach that judge for a reason. I aim to find out why." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded once, that fierce determination settling over her small features. "Okay, but I want to learn to shoot first." Caleb nearly choked on his coffee. "You want to what?" "Shoot. Papa was going to teach me, but we had to leave before he could." Grace lifted her chin. "I won't be helpless again." Part of him wanted to refuse. She was 7 years old. A child shouldn't need to know how to defend herself with a weapon. But Grace Sullivan wasn't a normal child anymore. The world had made sure of that. "All right," Caleb said slowly. "But you follow my rules exactly. No arguments." "No arguments." He spent the rest of that morning teaching her the basics. How to hold the small derringer he'd kept in his saddlebag. How to check if it was loaded. How to aim. He didn't let her fire it, not yet, but he made sure she understood respect for what a gun could do. "This ain't a toy," he said, watching her practice the grip for the dozenth time. "You only point this at something you intend to destroy. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "And you only use it if there's no other choice. Running is almost always better than fighting." Grace looked up at him. "Is that what you did when you were a lawman?" The question caught him off guard. "Sometimes. When it made sense. But not always." Caleb thought about the men he'd faced down. The ones he'd killed. The ones who'd deserved worse than death, but walked free because the law protected money and power more than it protected people. "No," he admitted. "Not always." Grace absorbed this with her usual solemnity. Then she handed the derringer back to him, grip first, exactly the way he'd taught her. "I'll remember everything you showed me." I know you will. That afternoon, while Grace practiced her letters in the dust by the fireplace, Caleb packed their supplies. Food, water, ammunition, medical supplies, blankets. His rifle and revolver both cleaned and loaded. He was strapping the saddlebags when Grace's voice came from behind him. Caleb. Yeah. What happened to your family? His hands stilled on the leather straps. You don't have to tell me, Grace added quickly. I saw the shawl. And the little bed in the corner. And I thought maybe. Caleb turned to face her. She stood by the table, clutching her hands together, looking like she regretted asking. It's okay, he said, surprised to find that he meant it. You shared your story with me. Only fair I share mine. He sat down on the edge of the bed, took a breath. My wife's name was Margaret. Maggie, I called her. We met in Colorado when I was just a deputy sheriff, barely old enough to shave. She was the prettiest thing I'd ever seen and smart as a whip. Don't know why she married a rough fool like me, but she did. Grace moved closer, sat on the floor near his feet, looking up at him with those two old eyes. We had a daughter. Caleb continued, his voice roughening. Lily, named after Maggie's mother. She was sunshine, that girl. Always laughing, always running. Used to drive me crazy how she'd chase the chickens around the yard. He stopped, swallowed hard. What happened to them? Grace whispered. Fever. Came through town one winter. Took half the children and a good portion of the adults. Maggie caught it nursing the neighbors. Lily caught it from her. Caleb's hands clenched on his knees. I tried everything. Doctors, medicine, prayers. Nothing worked. They died 3 days apart. Maggie first, then Lily. I'm sorry. After that I couldn't stay. Every corner of that house had memories. Every street in that town had ghosts. So I left. Came out here where there wasn't nothing and nobody to remind me of what I'd lost. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then, do you still miss them? Every day. Every single day. Does it ever stop hurting? Caleb looked at this child who was asking a question no 7-year-old should have to ask. Honest answer, no. But it changes, gets easier to carry. And sometimes... He paused, surprised by what he was about to say. Sometimes something happens that makes you realize you still got reasons to keep going, even when you thought you didn't. Grace tilted her head. Like finding me. His throat tightened. Yeah, Grace. Like finding you. She stood up and walked to him, put her small hand on his knee. I'm glad you found me too, she said softly. Even though everything else is terrible, I'm glad I'm not alone. Caleb covered her hand with his, didn't trust himself to speak. They stayed like that for a long moment, two broken people finding something worth holding on to in each other. Then Grace pulled back and wiped her eyes with her sleeve. We should finish packing. You said we're leaving early. That's right. Then I better get my things together. She headed toward her small collection of belongings, the book of nursery rhymes, the locket, with her parents' portraits, a ribbon her mother used to wear in her hair. Everything she had left of her old life fitting easily in one small bag. Caleb watched her pack with careful precision and felt something shift in his chest. For 6 years he'd been waiting to die. Now, for the first time, he had something to live for. The next morning dawned cold but clear. Caleb saddled Dusty while Grace ate a quick breakfast of cold biscuits and dried apple. They'd need to move fast and quiet, no fires, no unnecessary stops. Red Fork was a hard day's ride, and every mile meant exposure. You remember what I told you? Caleb asked as he helped Grace mount in front of him. If there's trouble, I hide and stay quiet until you come for me. And if I don't come... Her jaw tightened. I run. Find someone who looks kind. Tell them I'm lost. Good girl. They rode out as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Dusty moved steady and sure beneath them, seemingly grateful to be traveling after days cooped up in the stable. For the first few hours, nothing happened. Just the endless prairie stretching in all directions, the crunch of hooves through snow, the rhythmic motion that almost lulled Grace to sleep against his chest. Then Caleb spotted them. 3 riders on the ridge to the south, moving parallel to them, keeping pace. "Grace," she stiffened. "I see them." "Don't look directly. Keep your head down." "Are they the bad men?" "Don't know yet. Could be anyone." But his gut told him it wasn't anyone. His gut told him trouble had found them. Caleb urged Dusty faster. The mare responded, lengthening her stride. The riders on the ridge matched their speed. "They're following us," Grace whispered. "Yeah. What do we do?" Caleb scanned the terrain ahead. Open prairie for miles. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to make a stand. If those men decided to close in, there'd be no escape. Then he remembered. "There's a trading post about 2 miles ahead, run by an old trapper named Silas. If we can reach it, they'll catch us before then." She was probably right. But Caleb had one advantage those riders didn't know about. He knew this land. "Hold on tight," he told Grace, "and don't let go no matter what." Then he turned Dusty sharply to the east, toward a ravine that wasn't visible from the ridge. The mare plunged down the slope, snow spraying around them, Grace's small hands fisting in his coat. Behind them, shouts of surprise. The riders had been caught off guard. Caleb pushed Dusty harder. The ravine was narrow, treacherous, but it led to the creek bed that wound toward Silas's trading post. If they could stay ahead long enough, a gunshot cracked through the air. Grace screamed. Caleb hunched over her, shielding her with his body as the bullet whined past his ear. "Keep your head down." Another shot. This one hit the rocks beside them, sending shards flying. Caleb drew his revolver and fired blind behind them, not aiming to hit, just to slow them down, make them think twice about getting too close. The ravine twisted sharply to the left. Caleb took the turn at full speed, Dusty's hooves sliding on ice. For one terrible moment, he thought they'd go down. Then the mare found her footing and surged forward. The shot stopped. Caleb risked a glance back. The riders had reached the ravine entrance, but were hesitating, probably unsure of the terrain, worried about an ambush. Good. Let them worry. "Are you okay?" he asked Grace. Yes. Are they gone?" "Not gone, but we bought ourselves some time." They kept moving. The ravine emptied into the creek bed, which was frozen solid enough to ride on. Caleb followed it northeast toward the thin column of smoke he knew meant Silas's trading post. 10 minutes later, the weathered wooden structure came into view. Silas Burke stood on the porch, rifle in hand, watching them approach with narrowed eyes. He was 70 if he was a day, with a beard that reached his belt and a temper that had scared off more than one troublemaker. "Caleb Morgan," he called as they rode up. "Been a while." "Silas." Caleb dismounted, keeping Grace close. "I need a favor." The old man's gaze moved to Grace, then back to Caleb. That involved the 3 riders who've been asking about a man with a little girl. Caleb's blood ran cold. "They've been here yesterday. Offered good money for information." Silas spat into the snow. "Didn't like the look of 'em. Told 'em I ain't seen nobody." "I owe you." "You owe me nothing. Get inside before they circle back." The trading post was cramped and smelled of tobacco and animal hides, but it was warm and, more importantly, defensible. Silas had gun slots cut into the walls and enough ammunition to hold off a small army. "Who's the girl?" Silas asked as he bolted the door behind them. "Name's Grace. Her folks were killed few days back. The men who did it are hunting her." Silas looked at Grace with something that might have been sympathy. "Bad business. What'd her folks do to earn that kind of attention?" "Her father was a journalist. Uncovered something big. Something worth killing for." The old man grunted. "Always the same story. Rich men with dirty secrets, poor folks paying the price. He moved to the window, peering out through a crack in the shutters. They ain't following. Yet. But they will. Men like that don't give up easy. Grace tugged at Caleb's sleeve. Are we trapped? No, Silas answered before Caleb could. Got a tunnel out back. Leads to a cave system about half a mile from here. Old escape route from the Indian Wars. If things go bad, you can slip out that way. You'd do that for us, Caleb asked. Silas shrugged. Did it for plenty of folks over the years. One more won't hurt. His eyes moved to Grace again. Besides, anyone hunting a child ain't someone I want winning. They stayed through the afternoon, watching through the gun slots for any sign of the riders. Grace sat in a corner, knees drawn to her chest, silent and tense. Caleb crouched beside her. You okay? I don't like hiding. Nobody does. But sometimes it's the smart play. Those men, they're not going to stop, are they? Caleb wanted to lie. Wanted to tell her they'd give up, move on, leave them alone. But Grace deserved better than lies. Probably not, he admitted. Men like that, they got bosses who don't accept failure. As long as you're alive and know what your papa knew, you're a threat to them. I don't know anything, not really, just that papa had evidence about the railroad. Sometimes that's enough. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then, what if we gave them what they want? The evidence, I mean. Would they leave us alone? I don't think so. People who kill to keep secrets don't leave witnesses behind. Her face crumpled just for a second before she pulled it back together. Then we have to stop them first, before they stop us. The words came from a 7-year-old mouth, but the steel behind them was pure adult. Yeah, Caleb agreed. We do. At dusk, Silas handed Caleb a slip of paper. What's this? Name of a man in Red Fork, Henry Blackwood, local doctor. If you're looking for allies against the railroad, he's your best bet. How do you know him? Patched me up after a grizzly got too friendly about 10 years back. Good man. Lost his son to those railroad bastards, or so they think. Silas's eyes glinted. Boy's alive. Hiding out in Wyoming with evidence that could bring down half the territorial government. Caleb stared at him. How do you know all this? I'm an old man who sees a lot of travelers. They talk, I listen. Silas moved back to the window. Word of advice. Trust Blackwood. Trust nobody else. That town's got more snakes than the whole Montana territory. They waited until full dark to leave. Silas led them through his cellar to a narrow tunnel that smelled of earth and old bones. Grace held Caleb's hand so tight, her nails dug into his palm, but she didn't complain. Didn't slow down. This comes out in a cave about a half-mile west, Silas explained. From there you follow the creek north until you hit the main road. Should be clear, but keep your eyes open. Thank you, Silas, for everything. The old man waved off the gratitude. Just don't get killed. Hate to think all this effort went to waste. Then they were in the tunnel, the trading post closing behind them. The darkness was absolute. Caleb moved by feel, one hand on the wall, the other holding Grace. Their breathing seemed impossibly loud in the confined space. I can't see anything, Grace whispered. Neither can I. Just keep moving. One step at a time. They walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Then the tunnel began to slope upward, and Caleb caught the first scent of fresh air. The cave mouth opened onto a rocky hillside, the moon casting silver light across the snow. Below them, the creek wound northward, exactly as Silas had described. We made it, Grace breathed. Not yet. We still got miles to cover. They descended the hillside carefully, picking their way through rocks and ice until they reached the frozen creek. From there, they moved as fast as the darkness allowed. Caleb kept checking behind them, kept listening for hoofbeats, for voices, for any sign of pursuit. Nothing. Maybe they'd lost them. Maybe Silas's misdirection had worked. Or maybe those men were smarter than they looked and were already circling ahead to cut them off. Either way, there was only one option. Keep moving. Keep Grace safe. Get to Red Fork. Find the judge. Find the truth. And pray it didn't get them both killed. Hours later, as the first gray light of dawn crept over the horizon, they spotted the town. Red Fork sat in a shallow valley, a cluster of wooden buildings huddled together like survivors of a storm. Smoke rose from chimneys. A church steeple caught the early sun. Somewhere, a dog barked. It looked peaceful, normal. Caleb knew better than to trust appearances. "Is that it?" Grace asked, her voice rough with exhaustion. "That's it. Red Fork. It looks nice." "Looks can be deceiving." He pulled Dusty to a stop at the crest of the hill, studying the town below. The main street ran straight through the center, lined with the usual establishments: general store, saloon, hotel, sheriff's office. A courthouse stood at the far end, larger and more imposing than the other buildings. Judge Crawford would be there. The answers Grace's father had sent them to find. But so might the men hunting them. "What do we do now?" Grace asked. Caleb thought about Silas's advice. Trust Blackwood. Trust nobody else. "First we find that doctor," he said. "See if what Silas told us is true. Then we figure out how to reach the judge without getting ourselves killed. And if the doctor can't help us, then we improvise." Grace looked up at him with those two old eyes. "You make it sound simple. It ain't. But simple plans are the only kind that work when everything's falling apart." She considered this, then nodded. "Okay, let's go find the doctor." They descended into the valley together, the winter sun climbing higher behind them, the town of Red Fork waiting below with all its secrets and dangers. Caleb didn't know what they'd find there, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, he wasn't letting Grace face it alone. He'd made a promise in that frozen prairie, and Caleb Morgan kept his promises, even when keeping them might cost him everything. They entered Red Fork through the back streets, avoiding the main road, where too many eyes might notice a stranger with a child. Caleb kept his hat low, and Grace tucked close against his side, her small hand gripping his coat. "Where's the doctor's office?" Grace whispered. "Should be near the church, according to Silas." They found it easy enough, a two-story house with a small wooden sign that read, "Dr. Henry Blackwood, Physician." Caleb tied Dusty to the post and lifted Grace down. "Stay behind me," he said, "and don't speak unless I tell you it's safe." She nodded, her face pale but determined. Caleb knocked twice, waited. The door opened to reveal a tall, gaunt man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He looked at Caleb, then at Grace, and something shifted in his expression. "Can I help you?" "Silas Burke sent us. Said you might be someone worth trusting." The doctor's eyes narrowed. "Silas doesn't send people to me without good reason. Come in, quickly." They stepped inside and Blackwood closed the door behind them, sliding two heavy bolts into place. "Who's following you?" he asked without preamble. "3 men. Maybe more by now. They killed this girl's parents about a week back." Blackwood's gaze moved to Grace. His face softened slightly. "What's your name, child?" "Grace Sullivan." The effect was immediate. Blackwood went pale, his hand reaching out to steady himself against the wall. "Sullivan," he repeated. "Thomas Sullivan's daughter." Grace's eyes widened. "You knew my papa?" "I knew of him. He contacted me 3 months ago. Said he was bringing evidence that could expose the railroad's crimes." Blackwood's voice shook. "I thought. When he never arrived, I assumed the worst." "He's dead," Caleb said flatly. "Him and his wife both. Murdered on the prairie. Made to look like an accident." Blackwood closed his eyes. "God forgive them. Forgiveness ain't what I'm after." Caleb stepped closer. "Silas told me your son is alive. That he's got evidence hidden in Wyoming. Is that true?" The doctor's eyes snapped open. "Who told Silas that? Does it matter? Is it true?" A long silence. Then Blackwood nodded slowly. "Samuel faked his death 7 years ago. The railroad wanted him dead because he refused to falsify inspection reports after a bridge collapse that killed 12 people. I helped him escape. He's been in hiding ever since. And the evidence? Thomas Sullivan sent his documents to Samuel before leaving St. Louis. A writing case with a secret compartment. Everything the federal authorities need to bring down the entire corrupt network. Grace stepped forward. Then we have to get it. We have to finish what Papa started. Blackwood looked at her with something like wonder. You're a very brave child. I'm not brave. I'm angry. Her small hands clenched into fists. They killed my mama and papa. They're hunting me like an animal. I want them to pay. Caleb put a hand on her shoulder. Easy, Grace. No. She shook him off. I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of running. Papa died for the truth. I won't let that be for nothing. The room went quiet. Blackwood stared at Grace like he was seeing someone else. Maybe his own son at that age, making the same impossible choice. There's a problem, the doctor said finally. Samuel can't bring the evidence forward until he knows it's safe. He monitors news from Red Fork through informants' newspaper reports, telegraph gossip, court records. If we want him to come out of hiding, we need to create a signal he'll recognize. What kind of signal? Caleb asked. A public legal proceeding. Something official that would appear in the territorial records. Something that tells him we're ready. The inquest, Grace said suddenly. For my parents. Both men looked at her. Judge Crawford could call an inquest into their deaths, she continued. It would be public, official. Samuel would hear about it. Blackwood nodded slowly. It could work, but it would also draw the attention of everyone hunting you. The moment your name appears in court records, they'll know exactly where you are. Then we use that, Caleb said, the plan forming in his mind. We draw them in, set a trap, let them think they're closing in while we're actually controlling the situation. That's incredibly dangerous. So is doing nothing. Blackwood rubbed his temples. Judge Crawford is supposed to be trustworthy. Thomas believed in him. But in this town, trust is a luxury that gets people killed. We don't have a choice, Caleb said. Crawford's the only judge with jurisdiction. If we want this official, it has to go through him. The doctor was quiet for a long moment. Then he straightened, decision made. I have a hidden room in this house. Built it during the war for escaped slaves, used it later for wounded men who couldn't be seen. Grace can stay there while you meet with the judge. No. Grace's voice was sharp. I'm not hiding while everyone else takes risks for me. Grace, Caleb started. I mean it. This is my fight. My parents died for this. I deserve to be part of whatever happens next. Caleb knelt, so they were eye level. I know you do. And you will be. But right now, the most important thing is keeping you alive. If something happens to us, you're the only one left who knows the truth. But your papa trusted you to survive. That's why he hid you. That's why he wrote that note. He knew you were strong enough to carry on if he couldn't. Caleb gripped her shoulders. Don't let his sacrifice be for nothing by taking unnecessary risks. Grace's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. I hate this. I know. So do I. She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. Promise you'll come back for me. I promise. No matter what. Caleb pulled her into a tight embrace. No matter what. Blackwood showed them to the hidden room, a narrow space behind a false wall in the cellar, equipped with a bed lamp and enough supplies to last several days. Grace explored it with the critical eye of someone assessing a prison cell. It's small, she observed. But safe, Blackwood assured her. No one has ever found this room, not even during the most thorough searches. Grace sat on the bed, her legs dangling above the floor. How long will you be gone? Few hours, Caleb said. We need to find Sheriff Whitmore first, then approach the judge. Whitmore? Blackwood's eyebrows rose. Jacob Whitmore. You know him. Everyone knows him. He's been sheriff here for 15 years. Honest man but rigid about the law. He and the railroad have had disagreements in the past. Is he trustworthy? Blackwood considered. He won't break the law for you, but he won't break it against you either. If you can convince him you're on the right side of justice, he'll help. Caleb nodded. Then that's where we start. He turned back to Grace, who was watching him with those two old eyes. Remember what I taught you, he said. The derringer's in your bag. Don't use it unless you absolutely have to. I remember. And if something goes wrong, if we don't come back by nightfall, there's a tunnel that leads out of here. Dr. Blackwood will show you. You run, find someone kind, tell them you're lost. You told me that already. I'm telling you again. He smoothed her hair back from her face. You're the bravest person I've ever met, Grace Sullivan. Don't ever forget that. She threw her arms around his neck, held on like she might never let go. Come back, she whispered. Please come back. I will. I promise. Then he forced himself to pull away to climb the stairs to leave her alone in that hidden room. Each step felt like ripping something vital from his chest. At the top, Blackwood was waiting. She's quite remarkable, the doctor said quietly. Yeah. Caleb's voice was rough. She is. You care for her. It wasn't a question. I made her a promise, Caleb said. I intend to keep it. They found Sheriff Jacob Whitmore at the jailhouse, sitting behind a battered desk with a cup of coffee and a stack of wanted posters. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and silver-haired, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. He looked up when Caleb entered. His eyes narrowed. Well. Caleb Morgan. Been a long time. Caleb stopped short. You know me. Know of you. Deputy Sheriff in Colorado Territory, about 10 years back. Quit under mysterious circumstances. Whitmore leaned back in his chair. Word gets around in law enforcement circles. Then you know I'm not a criminal. I know you're not wanted for anything. That's not quite the same thing. The sheriff's gaze moved to Blackwood. Doctor, unusual company you're keeping. Jacob, this man needs your help. There's a child's life at stake. There usually is when trouble comes to town. Whitmore gestured to the chairs across from his desk. Sit. Talk. I'll decide whether to help or arrest you after I hear what you've got to say. Caleb told him everything. The wagon, the bodies, Grace, the men hunting her, the evidence her father had gathered, the conspiracy reaching all the way to St. Louis. Whitmore listened without interrupting. His face gave nothing away. When Caleb finished, the sheriff was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the street. 3 men matching your description arrived in town yesterday, he said, asking questions about a man traveling with a little girl, claimed to be family looking for a missing niece. Caleb's stomach tightened. They're here. The leader's name is Victor Crane. At least that's what he's calling himself. Whitmore turned back to face them. I've heard of him. Works for the railroad. Handles problems that can't be solved through legal channels. He's a killer. He's a professional. There's a difference. The sheriff's eyes hardened. Professionals don't make mistakes. They don't leave witnesses, and they don't stop until the job is done. Then help us stop him. How you want me to arrest him? On what charges being suspicious? Whitmore shook his head. The law needs evidence, Morgan. Without it, my hands are tied. We can get evidence. The inquest. We'll draw Crane and his men straight to the courthouse. You'll be walking into a trap of your own making. Then help us spring it first. Whitmore studied him for a long moment. Why do you care the girl's nothing to you? You could ride away right now, disappear into the mountains, let someone else deal with this mess. Caleb thought about Grace. Her empty eyes that first day. Her fierce determination. Her small hand finding his in the darkness. Because someone needs to, he said. And because I made her a promise. Something shifted in the sheriff's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "All right," Whitmore said finally. "I'll help. But we do this my way. By the book. No vigilante justice, no shortcuts. Whatever happens, it happens legally." "Agreed. And if this goes wrong, if people get hurt, that's on you, Morgan, not me." "I understand." The sheriff nodded once. "Then let's go see the judge." Judge Silas Crawford's office was on the second floor of the courthouse, a cramped room filled with law books and the smell of old paper. The judge himself was an imposing figure, 60-odd years old, white-haired, with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He listened to their proposal with an expression that revealed nothing. "An inquest," he repeated when they finished. "Into the deaths of two people I've never heard of involving accusations against one of the most powerful corporations in the territory." "That's right," Caleb said. "And you believe this will draw out the men responsible, force them into the open where they can be arrested?" "Yes, sir." Crawford steepled his fingers. "It's a dangerous gamble. If you're wrong about any of this, people could die, including that child you claim to be protecting. If we do nothing, she'll die anyway. At least this way she has a chance." The judge's eyes moved to Whitmore. "You're supporting this sheriff." "I am. Whatever my concerns about the plan, the facts are clear. A family was murdered on our territory. We have an obligation to investigate." "And Dr. Blackwood? What's your role in all this?" Blackwood stepped forward. "My son has evidence that could expose the railroad's crimes. Evidence Thomas Sullivan entrusted to him before his death. If we proceed with the inquest, Samuel will know it's safe to come forward." Crawford's expression flickered. Surprise maybe, or something else. "Your son is alive." "He is, in hiding, protected by his anonymity." "And this evidence, what exactly does it contain?" "Documents proving bribery, falsified safety reports, land theft. Enough to bring federal charges against a dozen men, including several territorial officials." The judge was quiet for a long moment. Caleb watched him carefully, trying to read his thoughts. "Very well," Crawford said at last. "I'll convene the inquest, day after tomorrow. That should give you time to prepare." "Thank you, Judge." "Don't thank me yet, Mr. Morgan. You're setting forces in motion that cannot be easily stopped." Crawford's eyes were cold. "I hope you're prepared for the consequences." They were almost at the door when the judge spoke again. "One more thing. The child, Grace Sullivan, she'll need to testify. As the only surviving witness, her account is essential to establishing the facts." Caleb's blood ran cold. "She's 7 years old." "Old enough to speak, old enough to tell the court what she saw and heard. You're asking me to put her in front of the men who killed her parents. I'm asking you to let justice take its course." Crawford's voice hardened. "If you want this inquest to have any legal weight, she must testify. Otherwise, it's just hearsay and speculation." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but he knew the judge was right. "I'll talk to her," he said through clenched teeth. "But the final decision is hers." "Fair enough." Crawford nodded dismissal. "Good day, gentlemen. I'll see you at the inquest." Outside the courthouse, Caleb stopped on the steps and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Something's wrong," he said. Whitmore frowned. "What do you mean?" "Crawford. He agreed too easily. Didn't push back, didn't ask for more proof. Just said yes and started planning. Maybe he believes in justice." "Maybe." Caleb shook his head. "Or maybe he's got his own reasons for wanting this inquest to happen." Blackwood looked troubled. "You think he's involved with the railroad?" "I don't know. But Silas told me to trust you and nobody else. Right now, that's advice I'm inclined to follow." They split up after that, Whitmore to coordinate with his deputies, Blackwood, to send word through his network that the inquest was happening. Caleb headed back to the doctor's house alone. He found Grace where he'd left her, sitting on the narrow bed in the hidden room, a book of nursery rhymes open in her lap. You came back, she said, relief flooding her voice. Told you I would. She set the book aside and studied his face. Something happened. What is it? Caleb sat down beside her, took a breath. The judge agreed to the inquest. Day after tomorrow. That's good, isn't it? It is. But there's a condition. He met her eyes. He wants you to testify. Tell the court what you saw and heard the night your parents died. Grace went very still. You mean, in front of everyone? Yes. In front of the bad men. Caleb nodded slowly. Victor Crane. That's the leader. He'll probably be there. Watching. Waiting. For a long moment, Grace didn't speak. Her small hands twisted in her lap. Will it help? She asked finally. Will my testimony help catch them? It might. The judge says it's necessary for the inquest to have legal weight. Then I'll do it. Grace. I said I'll do it. Her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. Papa died for the truth. If telling the truth is what it takes to get justice, then I'll tell it. Even if I'm scared. Caleb's chest tightened. This child kept finding new ways to humble him. You don't have to be brave for me, he said softly. It's okay to be scared. I know, but being brave is doing the right thing even when you're scared. She almost smiled. Papa taught me that. Your papa taught you a lot of good things. He did. A shadow crossed her face. I miss him. I miss both of them. I know you do. Grace leaned against his side, and he put an arm around her. They sat like that for a while, two broken people holding each other together. Caleb, she said eventually. Yeah. What happens after? If we catch the bad men and your friend Samuel brings the evidence and justice gets done, what happens to me then? It was the question he'd been dreading, the one he didn't have a good answer for. I don't know, he admitted. There might be family somewhere, people who'd take you in. I don't want family somewhere. I want to stay with you. The words hit him like a physical blow. Grace. I mean it. She pulled back to look at him. You saved me. You kept your promise. You're the only person in the whole world who makes me feel safe. Her voice cracked. Please don't send me away. Caleb looked at this fierce, fragile child who had somehow cracked open his frozen heart. This girl who had lost everything and still found the courage to keep fighting. I'm not exactly father material, he said roughly. I live alone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. I don't know anything about raising kids. You know how to be kind. You know how to protect people. You know how to keep your promises. Grace's eyes were bright with unshed tears. That's more than a lot of fathers know. He didn't have words for what he felt in that moment, so he just pulled her close and held on. We'll figure it out, he said finally. After this is over. We'll figure it out together. Promise. Promise. She relaxed against him, the tension draining from her small body. Caleb. Yeah. I'm glad you're my almost pa. His throat tightened. I'm glad too, Grace. More than you know. They stayed there in the hidden room as night fell over Red Fork, two souls clinging to each other while danger gathered outside. Tomorrow would bring the inquest. Tomorrow would bring Victor Crane and his men drawn like wolves to the scent of blood. Tomorrow would bring truth and violence and consequences that couldn't be predicted. But tonight, for just a few hours, they had peace. And sometimes, in a world full of darkness, that was enough. The morning of the inquest arrived with a tension that hung in the air like smoke before a wildfire. Caleb woke before dawn, having barely slept. He found Grace already awake, sitting on the edge of her bed, in the hidden room, dressed in the clean clothes Martha Brennan had brought the day before. You ready? He asked. No. She looked up at him with honest eyes. But I'm going to do it anyway. That's my girl. They ate breakfast in silence, neither of them hungry, both forcing down food because they'd need the strength. Dr. Blackwood joined them, his face drawn with worry. "Sheriff Whitmore sent word," he said. "Crane and his men are already positioning themselves around the courthouse. 5 of them now, not 3. They brought reinforcements. Apparently. Whitmore's deputies are in place, but they're outnumbered." Caleb absorbed this information. 5 professional killers against a handful of frontier lawmen. The odds weren't good. "What about Samuel?" he asked. "Any word?" Blackwood shook his head. "Nothing yet. But if he received our message, he'll come. I know my son. And if he doesn't, then we proceed without him. The inquest establishes the facts on record. Even if Crane escapes today, the truth will be documented. Others can carry the fight forward." Grace stood up, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. "I want to go over my testimony again." They spent the next hour reviewing what she would say. The journey from St. Louis, the men following them, the night of the crash, what she heard, what she saw, what she felt hiding under that canvas while her parents' killers searched the wagon. By the time they finished, Grace's voice was steady. Her eyes were dry. Whatever fear she felt was locked away behind a wall of determination. Caleb had never been prouder of anyone in his life. At 9 o'clock, Martha Brennan arrived with a heavy shawl and a worried expression. "The whole town's talking," she said. "Everyone knows something big is happening at the courthouse. Some folks are saying it's a murder trial. Others are saying the railroad's finally going to answer for its crimes." "What are you saying?" Caleb asked. Martha looked at Grace. "I'm saying be careful. Powerful men don't like being exposed. They'll do anything to stop it." "We know," Grace said quietly. "That's why we have to try." The walk to the courthouse felt like marching into battle. Caleb kept Grace close, one hand on his revolver eyes, scanning every doorway and rooftop. Whitmore's deputies were visible at strategic points along the street, but so were Crane's men, hard-faced strangers who watched their progress with predatory stillness. At the courthouse steps, Whitmore was waiting. "They're all inside," he said quietly. Crane's sitting in the 3rd row with 2 of his men. The other 2 are covering the exits. Covering or blocking? Both, probably. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "I don't like this, Morgan. Feels like we're walking into a trap." "Maybe we are, but it's the only play we've got." They entered the courthouse together. The gallery was packed, townspeople curious about the unusual proceedings, journalists from neighboring territories, officials who'd been summoned to witness. Judge Crawford sat at his bench, resplendent in black robes, his expression unreadable. And there, in the 3rd row, sat Victor Crane. He was exactly as Grace had described, handsome, in a cold way, well-dressed, with a scar that ran from his eye to his jaw. He looked up as they entered, and his gaze locked onto Grace with an intensity that made Caleb's blood run cold. Grace stumbled slightly. Caleb steadied her. "Don't look at him," he whispered. "Look at me. Just me." She nodded, her face pale, but resolute. They took their seats at the front of the gallery. Blackwood joined them a moment later, his medical bag clutched like a lifeline. Judge Crawford banged his gavel. "This inquest is now in session. We are here to examine the circumstances surrounding the deaths of Thomas and Eleanor Sullivan on or about March 15th of this year." His eyes swept the room. "I will hear testimony from witnesses and examine available evidence. At the conclusion, I will make a determination as to whether criminal charges are warranted." The first witness was Caleb himself. He took the stand and recounted finding the wagon, the bodies, the child hidden beneath the canvas. He described the signs of tampering, the wheel that had been deliberately loosened, the boot prints circling the wreckage, the gunshot wounds hidden beneath the victim's clothing. "In your professional opinion, Mr. Morgan, were these deaths accidental?" "No, sir. They were murder, calculated and deliberate." A murmur ran through the gallery. Crane's expression didn't change, and the child Grace Sullivan, she witnessed these events. She heard them. She was hidden as her father instructed, but she heard the men who came after the crash, heard them searching, heard them talking. "What did they say?" Caleb glanced at Grace. "I think she should tell you that herself." Crawford nodded. Very well. Miss Grace Sullivan, please approach the witness stand. The walk from her seat to the front of the room was the longest of Grace's life. She could feel Crane's eyes on her boring into her back like knives. Her legs trembled with each step, but she didn't stop, didn't falter. She reached the stand and climbed into the chair, her feet dangling above the floor. State your name for the record, Crawford said. Grace Elizabeth Sullivan. And your age? 7 years old. Miss Sullivan, can you tell the court what happened the night your parents died? Grace took a breath. Found Caleb in the crowd. He nodded once, encouragement and love and strength, all in that single gesture. She began to speak. We left St. Louis because Papa said it wasn't safe anymore. He'd found out bad things about the railroad people taking money they shouldn't, bridges being built, wrong people dying because rich men didn't care. He wrote it all down. He was going to give it to someone who could help. Who was that someone? Judge Crawford. Papa said you were honest, said you'd know what to do. A flicker of something crossed Crawford's face. Surprise, maybe. Or guilt. Continue, he said. They followed us. The bad men. Papa saw them on the road watching. He tried to lose them, but they kept finding us. Grace's voice steadied as she spoke. The night of the crash, something was wrong with our wagon. The wheel came off when we were going fast. We tipped over. Mama and Papa were hurt bad. And then I heard horses. Men talking. Papa told me to hide under the canvas and not make a sound no matter what. He said, her voice cracked. He said he loved me. And then I heard, what did you hear, Grace? Gunshots, 2 of them. And then the men laughed and said nobody would find us until spring. A tear slid down her cheek. I stayed hidden. All night. I thought they'd come back. I thought they'd find me. The gallery was utterly silent. Even Crane's men looked uncomfortable. Did you see any of these men? Crawford asked. Grace's eyes moved almost against her will to Crane. Him, she said, pointing. The one with the scar. He was there. I saw him through a gap in the canvas. He was standing over my papa's body, going through his pockets. The room erupted. Crane shot to his feet. This is outrageous. I've never seen this child before in my life. Sit down, Mr. Crane, Crawford ordered. You'll have your chance to respond. Respond to what? The fantasies of a traumatized child. Crane's composure cracked, revealing something ugly beneath. She's obviously been coached, paid probably to point fingers at innocent men. I said sit down. Whitmore's hand moved to his revolver. Crane's men tensed. The air in the courtroom crackled with violence barely contained. Slowly, Crane lowered himself back into his seat, but his eyes never left Grace. Miss Sullivan, Crawford continued, you're certain this is the man you saw that night? Yes, sir. I'll never forget his face. Grace's voice was steady, despite her tears. He killed my papa. He killed my mama. And he smiled while he did it. The testimony continued. Dr. Blackwood took the stand next, explaining his son's connection to the case, the evidence Samuel held, the conspiracy that reached from Montana Territory all the way to the halls of power in St. Louis. Then Martha Brennan testified about what she'd overheard Crane and his men asking questions about a child offering money for information. Then Whitmore presented the forensic evidence from the wagon. The loosened wheel bolts, the bullet fragments recovered from the bodies. Piece by piece, the case built itself into something undeniable. And through it all, Crane sat in his seat watching, waiting. His expression had settled back into cold calculation. He was planning something. Caleb could feel it. At noon, Crawford called a recess. We'll resume in 1 hour, he announced. I expect all parties to remain available. Caleb immediately moved to Grace's side. She was shaking now, the adrenaline of her testimony finally wearing off. You did so good, he told her. So brave. Is it over? Not yet, but soon. Blackwood approached with worry etched on his face. Samuel still hasn't arrived. I don't understand, he should be here by now. Maybe he's being cautious. Or maybe Crane's people intercepted him. The doctor's voice dropped. If Samuel doesn't bring that evidence, all of this Grace's testimony, everything, it could be dismissed as hearsay and speculation. Caleb's stomach tightened. Without the documents, they had a compelling story, but no proof. A good lawyer could tear their case apart. Keep faith, he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Samuel will come. They retreated to a small room off the main courtroom, a witness waiting area that Whitmore had secured for their use. Grace sat in a chair by the window, staring at nothing. The ordeal was taking its toll. I need water, she said quietly. I'll get it. Caleb moved toward the door. He was reaching for the handle when it burst open from the other side. Victor Crane stood in the doorway, 2 of his men flanking him. All 3 had guns drawn. Everyone stay exactly where you are, Crane said pleasantly. We're going to have a conversation. Caleb's hand moved toward his revolver. Don't. Crane's gun aimed directly at Grace. You might be fast, Mr. Morgan, but you're not faster than a bullet, and I won't miss. Caleb froze. Blackwood went pale. Grace pressed herself back into her chair, eyes wide with terror. What do you want? Caleb asked through clenched teeth. What I've always wanted. The evidence Thomas Sullivan stole. And the elimination of loose ends. Crane's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm going to give you a choice, Mr. Morgan. Tell me where Samuel Blackwood is hiding, and I'll make the girl's death quick. Refuse and, well, I have very creative methods for extracting information. I don't know where Samuel is. I don't believe you. It's the truth. We've been waiting for him to contact us. Crane studied him for a moment, then he shrugged. Very well, then we do this the hard way. He gestured to his men. Take the girl. No. Caleb lunged forward. A gun butt caught him across the temple. He went down hard, vision swimming, blood streaming from a gash above his eye. Caleb! Grace screamed. He tried to rise. A boot drove into his ribs, stealing his breath. Another blow landed on his back. He collapsed, gasping, helpless. Through blurred vision, he watched Crane's men drag Grace toward the door. She fought like a wildcat, kicking, biting, screaming, but she was 7 years old against 2 grown men. Let her go. Caleb managed his voice, barely a whisper. Please, she's just a child. Crane crouched beside him. She's a witness, and witnesses don't survive in my business. He patted Caleb's cheek with mock sympathy. Don't worry, you'll be joining her soon enough. He stood, nodded to his men, and followed them out. The last thing Caleb saw before darkness claimed him was Grace's terrified face disappearing through the doorway. Then nothing. Caleb woke to pain. His head throbbed. His ribs screamed with every breath. Blood had dried on his face, crusting his eye shut. Easy. Easy. Blackwood's voice came from somewhere above him. Don't try to move yet. Grace. They took her, about 20 minutes ago. The doctor's voice shook. I tried to stop them, but they knocked me down. By the time I recovered, they were gone. Caleb forced himself upright, despite his body's protests. The room spun violently, then steadied. Where did they take her? I don't know. Whitmore's men are searching, but Crane knows this territory. He could be anywhere. Crawford, the judge, he's involved. Blackwood stared at him. What? The way he looked when Grace pointed at Crane. The way he called that recess at exactly the right moment. Caleb's mind raced despite the pain. He's been working with them, setting us up. But Thomas trusted him. Thomas was wrong. Or Crawford was bought after Thomas made his plans. Caleb grabbed Blackwood's arm. Think. Where would Crane take her? Somewhere private. Somewhere he could work without being disturbed. The doctor's face went pale. Crawford has a hunting cabin, north of town near Crow Creek. He uses it when he wants to get away from the pressures of his position. That's where they'll be. Caleb staggered to his feet. The world tilted dangerously, but he stayed upright through sheer force of will. "You can barely stand," Blackwood protested. "You need medical attention. Grace needs me more." Caleb checked his revolver still in its holster, though they'd taken his rifle. "Can you get word to Whitmore, tell him where I'm going?" "Yes, but..." "Do it. And if Samuel shows up, send him after me with whatever evidence he's got. If I don't come back, at least the truth will be on record." He was almost to the door when Blackwood's voice stopped him. "Caleb, you're walking into a trap." "I know. You might not survive." Caleb thought about Grace. Her fierce courage, her desperate hope, her small hand holding his in the darkness. "Maybe not," he said. "But I made her a promise, and I'm going to keep it, whatever it takes." Then he was gone, stumbling out into the street toward the stable, toward Dusty, toward the girl who'd become his daughter in every way that mattered. The ride to Crawford's cabin was agony. Every jolt sent pain lancing through Caleb's injured ribs. Blood kept dripping into his eye, forcing him to wipe it away with his sleeve. His vision blurred, cleared, blurred again. But he kept going. Because Grace was out there somewhere, terrified and alone in the hands of men who would kill her without hesitation. He couldn't let that happen. He wouldn't. The cabin appeared as darkness fell, a squat structure against the ridge smoke rising from its chimney. 2 horses were tied outside, guards probably watching the approach. Caleb dismounted well back, leaving Dusty tied to a tree. He approached on foot, moving as silently as his injuries allowed. He'd covered about half the distance when a voice came from his left. "That's far enough, Morgan." Caleb froze. A figure emerged from the shadows, one of Crane's men, rifle leveled at his chest. "Drop the gun. Slow." Caleb complied. His revolver hit the snow with a soft thud. "Now walk. Toward the cabin. And don't try anything stupid." They marched him to the door. The guard knocked twice a signal, and it swung open to reveal Victor Crane standing in the firelight. "Mr. Morgan, how predictable." Crane smiled that cold smile. "I told my men you'd come. A man doesn't risk everything for a child he barely knows, unless he's developed attachments." "Where is she?" "Safe, for now." Crane stepped aside, gesturing Caleb into the cabin. "Please, join us. Judge Crawford has been eager to speak with you." Inside, the scene confirmed Caleb's worst fears. Grace sat in a chair near the fireplace, hands tied behind her back, a gag in her mouth. Her eyes found his immediately, terror and hope and desperate relief all mixed together. At the table sat Judge Crawford, looking considerably less composed than he had in the courtroom. His hands shook as he poured himself a drink. "This has gone too far," Crawford said without looking up. "I agreed to delay things, provide information. Not this. Not kidnapping children." "You agreed to do whatever was necessary," Crane replied coldly. "And now you're committed. There's no going back for any of us." Caleb moved toward Grace, but one of Crane's men blocked his path. "Not yet." Crane positioned himself between them. "First, we're going to have that conversation. Where is Samuel Blackwood?" "I don't know." Crane sighed, still with the lies. He drew a knife from his belt, long, thin, wickedly sharp. "Do you know what I'm going to do, Mr. Morgan? I'm going to ask you again, and every time you refuse to answer, I'm going to hurt her." He moved toward Grace. "Children are remarkably resilient. She might survive quite a lot before her body gives out. Touch her, and I'll kill you." "With what?" "Your harsh language?" Crane laughed. "You're unarmed, outnumbered, and barely standing. You have nothing. I have the truth. The whole town knows what happened in that courtroom. Grace's testimony is on record. Even if you kill us both, you can't undo that. Watch me." Crane's smile hardened. "Judge Crawford is going to declare the inquest invalid due to witness tampering. The girl was coached, the evidence fabricated, the whole thing a scheme by desperate men seeking to extort money from legitimate business interests. Your testimony will be struck from the record. It will be like none of this ever happened. You think people will believe that? People believe what they're told to believe, especially when the alternative is admitting that the powerful men who control their lives are murderers and thieves. The knife moved closer to Grace. She whimpered behind her gag, tears streaming down her face. Last chance, Crane said. Where is Samuel Blackwood? Caleb's mind raced. He had no weapons, no allies, no plan, just a battered body and a promise he couldn't keep. Then Grace's eyes met his, and he saw her hand move behind her back, not struggling against the ropes, reaching for something. The derringer. The one he'd given her. The one she'd hidden in her dress. She still had it. Caleb's heart stopped, then started again, pounding with desperate hope. He needed to buy her time, just a few more seconds. All right, he said loudly. All right, I'll tell you. Crane paused. Finally, some cooperation. Samuel Blackwood is hiding in a cave system about 10 miles north of here. Old mining tunnels. His father showed me on a map. It was a lie, but it sounded plausible. Crane's eyes narrowed, calculating. If you're lying, I'm not. I'll take you there myself. Just don't hurt the girl. Behind Grace's back, he saw her small fingers close around the derringer's grip. Crane considered for a long moment. Then he nodded. Very well. Crawford, you'll stay here with the girl and 2 of my men. The rest of us will go verify this information. He smiled at Caleb. And if you're lying, Mr. Morgan, I'll bring back a piece of her to show you before I kill you both. He turned toward the door. Grace moved. The derringer came up in her small hand. She fired. The shot caught Crane in the shoulder, spinning him around. He screamed, more surprise than pain, and crashed into the table. Everything happened at once. Caleb lunged for the nearest guard, driving his fist into the man's throat. The guard went down choking, and Caleb grabbed his rifle. Another guard raised his weapon. Caleb shot him through the chest before he could fire. The third guard, the one by the door, tried to flee. Caleb shot him in the leg, dropping him. Crawford scrambled for his own gun. Caleb put a bullet through his hand. Don't, Caleb warned, leveling the rifle at the judge's head. Give me a reason. Then silence. Crane lay on the floor, clutching his shoulder, blood spreading across his expensive coat. Crawford whimpered over his wounded hand. The guards were down, 2 dead ones screaming. Grace stood frozen where she'd fired the derringer, still clutched in her shaking hands. Her face was white as snow. Caleb crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. I shot him, she whispered. I shot him. You saved us. He held her tight, relief and terror and pride all crashing together. You saved us both. I was so scared. I know, but it's over now. It's over. Outside, hoofbeats approached. Voices called out. Whitmore's deputies finally arriving with Blackwood close behind. And with him, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and a leather case tucked under his arm. Samuel Blackwood had finally come. The cavalry had arrived. But the battle was already won. Won by a 7-year-old girl with a derringer and the courage to use it. The next hours blurred together in a chaos of activity. Whitmore's deputies secured the cabin, binding Crane's wounds just enough to keep him alive for trial. Judge Crawford sat in the corner, cradling his injured hand and refusing to meet anyone's eyes. The surviving guard was dragged outside to join his employers in custody. Samuel Blackwood knelt beside his father, the 2 men embracing for the first time in 7 years. I thought you were dead, Henry whispered. For 6 months I thought. I know. I'm sorry. I couldn't risk contacting you. Samuel's voice broke. They were watching everything. Everyone. It doesn't matter now. You're here. You're alive. Caleb watched the reunion from across the room, Grace still clutched against his chest. She hadn't let go since the shooting, her small body trembling with aftershocks of terror and adrenaline. "Is it really over?" she asked, her voice muffled against his coat. "Almost. Samuel brought the evidence. Your papa's evidence." "Will it be enough?" Caleb looked at the leather case Samuel had carried, the writing case with its secret compartment filled with documents that could bring down an empire of corruption. "Yeah," he said. "I think it will." Sheriff Whitmore approached, his expression grim but satisfied. "Crane's talking," he reported. "Trying to cut a deal. Names, dates, bank accounts. He's giving up everything to save his own neck." "Will it work, the deal?" "Not a chance. Man's got too much blood on his hands. But his testimony will help convict the others." Whitmore's eyes moved to Grace. "How's she doing?" "She shot a man tonight. She's 7 years old, and she shot a man to save my life." Caleb's voice roughened. "How do you think she's doing?" The sheriff nodded slowly. "She's strong. Stronger than most grown men I've known. She'll get through this." "Will she?" Whitmore put a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "With you looking after her?" "Yeah, I believe she will." They transported the prisoners back to Red Fork under heavy guard. The whole town had turned out despite the late hour drawn by rumors and the unmistakable signs of violence. People lined the streets watching in silence as Crane and Crawford were marched to the jailhouse. Martha Brennan was waiting at the doctor's house with warm food and warmer blankets. She took one look at Grace's pale face and immediately went into mother hen mode. "Come here, child. Let's get you cleaned up and fed." Grace hesitated, looking at Caleb. "Go on," he said gently. "I'll be right here." "Promise?" "Promise." She let Martha lead her away, but she kept glancing back until she disappeared into the house. Caleb sagged against the porch railing, suddenly aware of how badly his body hurt. His ribs screamed. His head throbbed. The gash above his eye had opened again, blood trickling down his face. "You need medical attention," Henry Blackwood said, appearing beside him. "Later. Now, you're no good to that girl dead from internal bleeding." The doctor's tone brooked no argument. Caleb let himself be led inside, where Henry cleaned and bandaged his wounds with efficient professionalism. "Cracked ribs, most likely. Possible concussion. You're lucky to be alive." "Luck had nothing to do with it. Grace saved me." Henry paused in his work. "Samuel told me what she did. Remarkable child." "She's more than remarkable. She's—" Caleb trailed off, unable to find words big enough for what he felt. "She's yours," Henry finished quietly. "In every way that matters." Caleb met the doctor's eyes. "Yeah, she is." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of legal proceedings and official statements. Samuel Blackwood's evidence proved even more damning than anyone had expected. The documents in Thomas Sullivan's writing case detailed a conspiracy reaching from Montana Territory to the halls of Congress. Senators bribed safety inspectors, paid off land stolen from honest homesteaders through forged deeds and intimidation. Federal marshals arrived from Denver. Then, investigators from Washington. The scandal exploded across territorial newspapers, spreading east like wildfire. Victor Crane was charged with multiple counts of murder, including Thomas and Eleanor Sullivan. Judge Crawford was arrested for conspiracy and abuse of office. A dozen other officials and railroad executives found themselves suddenly unable to explain their involvement in what the papers were calling the greatest corruption scandal in Western history. Through it all, Caleb stayed close to Grace. She had nightmares now. Woke screaming in the darkness, reliving the moment she'd pulled the trigger. Caleb would hold her until the terror passed, whispering reassurances he wasn't sure either of them believed. "I killed someone," she said one night, her voice hollow. "I'm a murderer." "No." Caleb's grip tightened. "You defended yourself. You defended me. There's a difference." "But I shot him. To save our lives. That's not murder, Grace. That's survival." He pulled back to look at her face. Your papa taught you that being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared. You were brave that night, the bravest person I've ever known. I don't feel brave, I feel sick. That's because you're human. The day taking a life doesn't bother you is the day you've lost your soul. Caleb smoothed her hair back from her face. It'll get easier. Not better, some things never get better, but easier to carry. How do you know? He thought about the men he'd killed over the years, in the war, as a lawman, in that cabin 2 nights ago. Because I've been where you are, and I'm still standing. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then, will you help me when it gets hard? Always. That's what family does. She looked up at him, something shifting in her eyes. Family. Caleb realized what he'd said. Realized he meant it. Yeah, Grace, family. A week after the confrontation at the cabin, Whitmore summoned Caleb to the jailhouse. Got news? The sheriff said. Thought you'd want to hear it in person. Good news or bad, depends on your perspective. Whitmore leaned back in his chair. Federal court in Denver has agreed to take the case. Crane, Crawford, all of them, they'll be tried together. Biggest corruption trial in territorial history. That sounds like good news. It is, but there's a complication. The sheriff's expression grew serious. They want Grace to testify again, in Denver, in front of the federal judge and all those lawyers. Caleb's stomach tightened. She's already testified once. She shot a man defending herself. Haven't they put her through enough? I agree, but her testimony is crucial. She's the only living witness to the Sullivan murders. Without her account on the federal record, Crane's lawyers might be able to get the murder charges reduced. To what? Conspiracy. Accessory after the fact. Things that carry prison time, but not the rope. Whitmore met his eyes. These men killed her parents, Caleb. They deserve to hang for it. But that won't happen unless Grace takes the stand. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. He wasn't Grace's father, not legally. He had no right to make this choice for her. But he knew what she'd say. I'll talk to her, Caleb said. But the final decision is hers, not mine. Not the court's, hers. Fair enough. That evening, Caleb found Grace in the small garden behind Dr. Blackwood's house. She was sitting on a bench, staring at nothing, the locket with her parents' portraits clutched in her hands. Can I sit? He asked. She nodded. He settled beside her, letting the silence stretch. Sometimes words weren't necessary. Sometimes just being there was enough. I heard Whitmore talking, Grace said finally. They want me to testify again. You heard that? I wasn't eavesdropping. The window was open. She looked down at the locket. Will it help? Will it make sure the bad men pay for what they did? It might. The sheriff thinks so. Then I'll do it. Grace. I know what you're going to say. That I don't have to. That I've been through enough. She lifted her chin, that fierce determination settling over her features. But this isn't about me anymore. It's about Mama and Papa. It's about justice. It's about making sure nobody else has to go through what we went through. Caleb studied her face. The fear was still there, buried deep, but so was something else, something stronger. You're sure? I'm sure. Her voice didn't waver. Papa died for the truth. I won't let his death mean nothing. He pulled her into a hug, held on tight. I'm so proud of you, he said roughly. You know that. I know. Her arms squeezed back. I'm proud of you too. Me? What did I do? You came for me. When Crane took me, you came. Even though you were hurt. Even though you knew you might die. Grace pulled back to look at him. That's what a father does, isn't it? Protects his family no matter what. The word hit him like a thunderbolt. Father. Grace, he started, but she wasn't finished. I've been thinking, she continued, About what happens after all this, after the trial, after everything's done. She took a breath. I don't have any family left. Mama and Papa are gone. There's nobody else. We talked about this. We're going to figure it out. I know what I want. Her eyes met his. I want to stay with you, forever, not just as your ward or your responsibility, as your daughter. Caleb's throat closed up. He couldn't speak. I know I'm not your real daughter, Grace rushed on. I know you had a family before, a wife and a little girl who died. I'm not trying to replace them. I could never replace them. But maybe we could be a new family. A different family. Built out of all our broken pieces. A tear slid down Caleb's face. He didn't bother to wipe it away. Grace, he managed. I'm not. I don't know how to be a father. I failed my own daughter. I couldn't save her. You couldn't save her because there was nothing to save her from. She got sick. It wasn't your fault. Grace's small hand found his. But you did save me. You found me in the snow when I should have died. You kept me warm. You kept me safe. You came for me when the bad men took me. She squeezed his fingers. That's more than enough. That's everything. Caleb looked at this child who had lost everything and still found the strength to love again. This girl who had faced down killers and kept her soul intact. This tiny, fierce person who saw past all his walls and scars to the broken man underneath and wanted to stay anyway. Okay, he said, his voice cracking. Okay, let's be a family. He pulled her close. Let's be a family, Grace. She buried her face against his chest. He felt her tears soaking through his shirt. But they were good tears. Healing tears. The tears of a daughter who had finally found her way home. The trial in Denver lasted 3 weeks. Grace testified on the 5th day. She walked into that federal courtroom with her head high and her voice steady, and she told the truth. Every terrible detail. Every moment of horror and loss and fear. When she pointed at Victor Crane and said, "That man murdered my parents," the whole room felt it. The judge, the lawyers, the journalists scribbling furiously in their notebooks. Crane's defense attorney tried to shake her, suggested she was confused, coached, motivated by revenge. Grace never wavered. I know what I saw, she said calmly. I know what I heard, and I know what kind of man he is. And what kind is that? The kind who kills innocent people and smiles while he does it. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel, but the damage was done. Crane was convicted on all counts. Murder, conspiracy, fraud, half a dozen other charges that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life, however short that might be. Judge Crawford received 20 years. The railroad executives got varying sentences. The corrupt officials were stripped of their positions and prosecuted separately. Thomas Sullivan's evidence had done exactly what he'd hoped. It had exposed the truth. It had brought down the powerful men who thought they were untouchable. It had changed everything. After the verdicts were read, Grace stood on the courthouse steps with Caleb beside her. Reporters shouted questions. Photographers set up their equipment. The whole country wanted to know about the brave little girl who had helped bring down an empire of corruption. Miss Sullivan, how does it feel to finally have justice? Grace considered the question for a long moment. It doesn't bring them back, she said finally. My mama and papa, nothing can bring them back. Her hand found Caleb's. But at least now everyone knows the truth. Everyone knows who they were and what they died for. That matters. And what will you do now? Grace looked up at Caleb. He looked back at her. We're going home, she said. They left Denver the next morning. The journey back to Montana took nearly 2 weeks. They could have taken the train, the very railroad that had caused so much suffering, but neither of them wanted to. Some things deserved to be done slowly, properly. They rode through valleys and over mountains, camped under stars that seemed brighter than Caleb remembered. Talked about everything and nothing, favorite foods, silly jokes, dreams for the future. And they talked about the past. "Tell me about Lily," Grace said one evening as they sat by their campfire. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "She had Margaret's eyes, brown with little gold flecks, and the craziest laugh you ever heard, like a whole flock of birds taking off at once." "What else?" "She loved animals. Any animal. Couldn't pass a stray dog without trying to bring it home. Drove her mama crazy." A smile touched his lips. "And she asked questions constantly. Why is the sky blue? Where do rivers go? What makes stars shine?" "I do that too," Grace said softly. "I know, I noticed." He looked at her across the firelight. "You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks, but in spirit. That stubborn determination, that fierce little heart. Does that make you sad?" Caleb considered the question. Once it would have. The comparison would have been a knife in an open wound. But something had changed. Somewhere along the way the pain had shifted. Not disappeared, it would never disappear, but transformed into something he could carry without being crushed. "No," he said finally. "It makes me grateful. Grateful I got to love her. Grateful I get to love you." Grace moved around the fire to sit beside him, leaned her head against his arm. "I think she'd be glad," Grace said. "Lily, I think she'd be glad you're not alone anymore." Caleb put his arm around her, held her close. "Yeah," he said. "I think she would too." They reached the cabin on a crisp afternoon in late spring. The snow had melted. The prairie stretched green and gold in every direction. Wildflowers dotted the landscape in patches of purple and yellow and red. Grace stood in the yard, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "It looks different," she observed. "Brighter. Spring will do that." "No." She shook her head. "It's not just the season. It feels different. More like home than before." Caleb understood. The cabin hadn't changed, same weathered wood, same small porch, same view of endless prairie. But they had changed. And that made all the difference. "We've got work to do," he said. "Place needs repairs. Fence is down on the north side. Garden needs planting if we want vegetables come summer." Grace nodded enthusiastically. "Can I have my own garden? Martha showed me how to grow tomatoes." "You can have whatever you want." She ran toward the cabin, already making plans. Caleb followed more slowly, savoring the moment. Inside, dust covered everything. The fire had gone cold months ago, but the bones were good. The structure was sound. Like them really. Battered and weathered, but still standing. Still strong. Grace explored the space with fresh eyes, seeing not what it was, but what it could become. "We need curtains," she declared. "And maybe some paintings. And definitely a bigger table so we can have company for dinner." Company. Sheriff Whitmore, Dr. Blackwood, Martha, Samuel. She ticked names off on her fingers. "We have friends now, Caleb. We should invite them over. Friends, family, company for dinner." A year ago, those words would have meant nothing to him. Now they meant everything. "All right," he agreed. "Curtains, paintings, a bigger table, whatever you want." Grace beamed at him. That smile, unguarded, joyful, fully alive, was worth every moment of pain and fear and sacrifice. "Can we start tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow sounds perfect." That evening they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie. Grace had found the old shawl, Margaret's shawl, and wrapped it around her shoulders without asking. Caleb didn't mind. Somehow seeing it on Grace felt right, like a blessing from beyond. "Caleb." "Yeah." "I've been thinking about what to call you." He looked down at her. "What do you mean?" "Well, you're going to adopt me, right? Make it official." "First thing when we get back to town." "Then I need to decide what to call you." She chewed her lip thoughtfully. Father feels too formal. Daddy is for little kids. Papa was what I called my real papa, and that doesn't feel right either. You could just keep calling me Caleb. But you're not just Caleb anymore. She looked up at him with those wise old eyes. You're more than that. You're... She trailed off thinking. What about Pa? She said finally. It's different from Papa, but it still means father. It still means family. Pa. Such a simple word. 2 letters, 1 syllable. But it carried the weight of everything they'd been through, everything they'd lost, everything they'd found. Pa works, Caleb said, his voice rough. Grace smiled. Okay, Pa. She settled against his side, and they watched the last light fade from the sky. Stars emerged one by one. The same stars that had witnessed so much suffering and loss. The same stars that now witnessed something new being born. Pa, Grace said after a while. Yeah. I'm glad you found me. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I'm glad you found me too, Grace. More than you'll ever know. She snuggled closer. Her breathing deepened. In minutes, she was asleep safe and warm, and loved dreaming whatever dreams children dream when they finally feel secure. Caleb sat in the growing darkness holding his daughter, looking out at the prairie that had once been his exile, and was now his home. He thought about Margaret and Lily, about Thomas and Eleanor Sullivan, about all the people who had loved and loved again. He thought about the man he'd been a year ago, broken, bitter, waiting to die, and the man he was now, healed, hopeful, with a reason to live. Grace had given him that. This fierce little girl who'd refused to let tragedy destroy her, who'd found the courage to trust again, to love again, to build something new from the wreckage of the old. She'd saved him, just as surely as he'd saved her. They'd saved each other, and that was exactly how it was supposed to be. Caleb Morgan looked up at the stars and made one final promise. Not to Grace this time, but to himself. He would never waste another day waiting for death, never hide from life behind walls of grief and isolation. Never forget that the greatest gift wasn't avoiding pain, it was finding people worth risking pain for. Grace stirred in her sleep, murmuring something too soft to hear. Caleb pulled her closer. I got you, he whispered. I got you, Grace, and I'm never letting go. The night wrapped around them like a blessing, and for the first time in 6 years, Caleb Morgan felt truly, completely, unquestionably home. Not because of the cabin or the prairie or the familiar stars overhead, because of the child in his arms, his daughter, his family, his second chance at everything that mattered. Some stories end with death and loss and unanswered questions. This one ended with life, with love, with a lonely cowboy who found a frozen child in the snow and made her a promise he would die to keep. A promise that became a family that became a home, and a home that would stand strong and true for all the years to come.